I want you to think about a time in your life when you've been discouraged. Have you ever been discouraged? I mean, we all have times like that. Some are worse than others. But everybody goes through times of discouragement. I talked to Carmen and Abby this afternoon. I mean, they're both just in the pits right now, discouraged. I know Buddy Bumbleow's discouraged because he's been through a lot with his back. I know Donnie Carter goes through a lot of discouragement with, he's had, I don't know how many back surgeries he's had, but he's not much better than he ever was. That's discouraging. I know Butch gets really discouraged because his disease never goes away. It pops up here, and then it pops up there, and then, he has to have foot surgery, and then he has to have knee surgery, and then he has to have neck surgery, and then, it's just always something. There's been a lot of studies done in recent years, and a lot of articles written in recent years about caregivers. Because as our society ages and as more and more and more people live longer and longer, I mean, you didn't have that many people who were over, say, 70. If you were over 70, man, you were like a phenomenon. Well, nowadays, 20% of our population is over 70. And living into their 80s and into their 90s. And as the boomer generation begins going into retirement now, many of them already are, we're going to see more and more of this going on where children become caregivers rather than care receivers later on in life, and roles get reversed, and you get into all the problems of extended care and long-term care and medical issues and all the financial juggling and Medicare and the donut hole and the gap and all this stuff. And I mean, it's really discouraging to a lot of people. The economy is a lot rougher on folks than it used to be. And so there are a lot of people financially that are just very discouraged. When they give the figures they say, well, the unemployment rate's gone down, but what they don't include in the unemployment rate, that just means those who are unemployed who are still looking for work. It doesn't include the 3 or 4 million people who have just given up on finding work and have just dropped out of the workforce. And that raises the question, well, how are they living? And I think we all know the answer to that. And so that they're discouraged. I mean, when you have a high-tech job and you get laid off because some guy younger than you can do the same job for half of what you're getting paid, and you look for 2.5 years for another job and can't find one, you get discouraged. Have you ever gotten discouraged spiritually? Have you ever had a low time spiritually when you just give up? And some of us may be back in church now who at one time gave up. And through the grace of God have found our way back home, and that's a good thing. We all get discouraged. Leadership in the church can be very discouraging sometimes. We're rolling really well right now. I mean, it's just almost giddy to come to church on Sunday, isn't it? You ever notice that? I mean, I look forward to coming just to see who's here this Sunday. It's exciting. I have been with this church 25 years, and I can tell you, there were lots of Sundays when you didn't even want to show up because you felt like there probably wasn't going to be anybody there. Been through those too. So we all understand. I think the question that rises is, what are the limits? What are the limits of human tolerance? How much garbage can you process before the garbage machine breaks down and you quit processing it? Have you ever dreamed of just going off on an island all by yourself, or up in a mountain cabin all by yourself, and just, you drive up the dirt road to the cabin, and then before you go in the door of the cabin, you pull the dirt road in behind you, and then you shut the door and lock it? And just stay there? You ever had that desire? Get discouraged, don't we? If I could just wash my hands of everything and just live in a cabin, but my son David and I talk about this a lot. About times when we wish we could just go off in a cabin. I always want to ask if Ted Kaczynski's old cabin is available. You remember him, the Unabomber, lived up in Montana on some mountainside in this one-room shack? I've often wanted to check and see online if maybe that thing was for sale. I don't want the bomb stuff, but the cabin looks good. So, the thing is, in the midst of all of that, there's a part of us that still believes that there's light at the end of the tunnel and that the light is not a train coming towards us. We want to believe that things are going to get better. And in fact, they usually do. It's just that in the midst of the crisis, it doesn't always seem that way. The word discourage means to deprive of courage. Discourage means to take away courage, to deter, to dishearten, to hinder somebody. The New Testament has 3 words for it. Not going to give you the words, you wouldn't care. But all 3 mean to grow. Remember how the Bible talks about don't grow weary or don't faint? Let's look at some passages real quick. In Colossians 3, just want to give you an example of what the Bible says about this. In Colossians 3, verse 21, Paul says to parents, listen to this, parents. He says, fathers, do not embitter your children, or they will become what? Discouraged. Can a parent discourage a child? Sure they can. I have a little girl that I'm doing an exercise with my kids this week. One of the things I want each one of the kids to tell me is something that they're proud of. So, I want you to tell me something. Maybe you're proud of the fact that you've got a nice smile. That's great. Maybe you're proud of the fact that you know how to be a good friend to people. That's a fantastic. Maybe you're the best video game player in your neighborhood. If that's your claim to fame, buddy, that's great. You got something to be proud of. I had one little girl tell me, and she said stuff like this for years. She says, I don't have anything to be proud of. My sister tells me I'm stupid, and my family doesn't like me, and I can't do anything right. 2nd grade. She's already written her life off. She discouraged, didn't she? That's sad. So we can certainly cause a lot of damage by the way we handle people sometimes. 2 Corinthians 4, verse 1. Just going to look at some of these verses real quick. 2 Corinthians 4, verse 1. Therefore, since through God's mercy we have this ministry, we do not lose heart. This is another one of those words, to lose heart. Paul says, since I know that my calling and my ministry is from God himself, and I'm doing what God wants me to do, I don't lose heart. The implication is I have plenty of reasons to lose heart. You don't tell people you're not losing heart unless there's something going on that would raise the question of, well, are you even going to keep trying? You know what I'm saying? A team that's 14-0 doesn't talk about, no, we try not to lose heart. 14-0 teams don't worry about losing heart. 0-14 teams are the ones that worry about losing heart. 7-7 teams who are used to going to the playoffs and won't go this year talk about not losing heart. So it implies a certain amount of adversity. Look at verse 16, 2 Corinthians 4:16. Different use of the word, but certainly, therefore he says, Paul says, in their own lives, we don't lose heart. Though outwardly we're wasting away, there's your negative. Though outwardly we're wasting away, yet inwardly we're being renewed day by day. So he's talking about not losing heart spiritually in your service to God. Ephesians 3 verse 13. Take a look at that one real quick. Ephesians 3:13, Paul says, I ask you therefore not to be discouraged, and then here's the negative, because of my sufferings for you, which are your glory. So Paul has evidently undergone some hardship as a result of his ministry with the Ephesians. He says, don't let that discourage you. You keep your faith and carry on. Don't be discouraged about that. And finally in Luke 18:1, and this is a classic passage that I love so much. It's about prayer. Very important statement about prayer. Then Jesus told his disciples a parable to show them that they should always pray and not give up. Okay? So, Luke gives you a little editorial comment. The purpose of this parable was to encourage them not to give up when it comes to their praying. So we have several passages like that. It's one fellow has said it takes diligent faith to live above discouragement. You got to work at it. To live above discouragement, you've got to work at it. It's not going to be, if you're just going to go with what's natural and easy. By the way, can a group of people be discouraged? Yes. Churches can be, ball teams. Can a nation be discouraged? Yes. Sure it can. Look at many of the nations of the world during the Depression. What gave rise to a lot of these nationalistic movements after World War I? That eventually gave rise to what? Mussolini in Germany, or Mussolini in Italy, Hitler in Germany, Hideki Tojo in Japan. How did those guys come? We look at that and we think, how could a bunch of fruitcakes if you look at the personalities of these leaders, they're crazy. And everybody knew they were crazy. They were crazy long before we saw them as leaders. And everybody knew it. And yet they rose to power and were swept into office, and they were taken with a why? They were serving nations that had lost, in a couple of cases, had lost in World War I and were being oppressed. The Great Depression had hit. Everything was falling apart. The nation collectively was just discouraged. They were just in the dumps. And they would have taken any new face that walked in the door. Anything different from what they had. Didn't matter what it was. That's what sometimes discouragement can push you to doing ridiculous, irrational things. And so, I think one thing that one of the root causes of suicide among people is discouragement. Because you get to the point where you don't see any light at the end of the tunnel and you just don't see any way out. Circumstances have piled up and you just, in your finite understanding of life, you just don't see any other options. And so, you take that one. Now, if you go to Nehemiah chapter 4 in the Old Testament, we see another situation like that. I'm going to use that as the basis for our thoughts tonight as we kind of pull out some quick lessons from this. Nehemiah, the children of Israel have returned from captivity. Jerusalem, some 75 years earlier, had been completely destroyed. The city was completely annihilated. The temple was burned to the ground and torn apart, dismantled. All of the treasures of the temple, including all of the vessels, were carried away. The Ark of the Covenant was carried off. All the goldware and all the sacred vessels were carried off. We read about some of them being abused in the book of Daniel. All of the furniture of the temple, the bronze laver, the huge bronze doorways, everything that represented the splendors of the temple, it was all destroyed. Anything made of marble or gold or silver or any precious anything of any kind was all taken away. The Babylonians just took it as plunder. What was left was burned to the ground and dismantled. The walls of the city, which were formidable, 30 feet wide, maybe 50, 60 feet high, all of that was dismantled. It was torn down and just thrown to the side. So, I mean, there may have been remnants laying around, but there was essentially no city at all. Everything was just gone. And it had been that way now for about 4 generations. God raises up this king in Persia, Cyrus, and he rules that the peoples of all the world that were all displaced by the Babylonians can all, if they wish, return to their homelands. And so a small, and I stress this, a very small minority of Jews decides to go back to Jerusalem and try to reestablish the kingdom of David. And it is a small minority. Most Jews in that period of time chose to stay in exile because by then they had settled into wherever they were moved to. They had opened their own shoe shops and bakeries and clothing stores, and you know, they had very little incentive to go back to basically poverty and hardship. But a handful of zealous people went back under, well, first of all, under, my mind just went blank. I want to say Ezra, but even before Ezra, there was an individual who took, no, that's the king, but no. I'm brain dead tonight. I apologize for that. It's very discouraging. A small group went back initially. They basically failed. Ezra was raised up by God. Ezra goes back, as you can read in the book prior to this, and leads a kind of a spiritual revival. They do enough. They basically clean off the altar platform and set up a little village around the platform and offer burnt offerings to God. And that's about as far as the restoration goes until God stirs the heart in the book of Nehemiah of one of the advisors to the king of Persia named Nehemiah. And God raises him up to lead a complete restoration coming back. He resigns his position, travels to Palestine with another group of workers, and begins to stoke the fires of let's get this thing going. Let's build the walls back. Let's restore the temple the way it should be done. And let's really rebuild the city of Jerusalem. So they're right in the middle of that, and of course they run into all kinds of problems. Number one, the work of rebuilding these walls and temples is backbreaking and overwhelming. These are massive, massive structures that were built at the time. They were built by literally thousands and thousands and thousands of forced workers. Well, you don't have that workforce available now. You just got this limited handful of workers. And on top of all of that, they're not the haves now. They're the have-nots. And they are surrounded by opposition. To the north, the Samaritans opposed them under a man named Sanballat. To the east, the Ammonites opposed them under a guy named Tobiah. To the south, the people of Ashdod, Philistines, opposed them. To the west, or that was to the west. To the south, the Arab tribes under Geshem. These three of these names play a lot in this book. You've got Tobiah, Geshem, and Sanballat. These four groups that basically surround the Israelites on all four sides form a kind of an unholy alliance and dedicate themselves to one thing, and that is to squeeze these vermin out of the land. They want to basically squeeze this small Jewish enclave out of the country because they consider them, after almost 100 years, as foreigners. They don't want them around. And so they oppose them. And they do it with guerrilla tactics. They do it with terrorist actions, hit and run attacks and things like that. To the point that the workers on the walls had to arm themselves. Basically what it says they carried a tool in one hand and a sword in the other. Or if they had to use both hands, they would lay their sword right here and they would lean down and lift the rock so that if an attack began, they could drop the rock and run grab their... I mean, it was that unstable. And this was continual. And when they weren't attacking, they were standing down below and shouting insults at them. And making fun of them. What we would call in our society today, bullying. Now, can bullying be discouraging to somebody? Sure it can. I've seen kids that don't want to come to school because they're being bullied. I've seen people who didn't want to go to work because they were being bullied and just didn't want to go. You have to fight them tooth and nail to get them out of bed. And they weren't sick, wasn't anything wrong with them. Just didn't want to go because they were scared to death about what was going to happen when they got there. I get that. Well, imagine having to work. You talk about our modern definition of a hostile work environment. This was one, wasn't it? So into the midst of this comes Nehemiah. And he gives us two lines of thought that I'd like us to talk about for just a few minutes, and then we'll kind of tuck this away. Let me make sure I'm okay here. Yeah, we're fine. We're going to look at chapter 4, and I want us to notice some things. It says, and here's your opposition. It says, when Sanballat heard that they were rebuilding the wall, he got angry and was greatly incensed, and he ridiculed the Jews, and in the presence of his associates in the army of Samaria, he said, what are these feeble Jews doing? Do they think they're going to restore their wall? Are they going to offer sacrifices? Can they even finish in a day? Can they bring the stones back to life from these heaps of rubble, burnt as they are? I mean, the place was trash. They're having to sit there literally and piece the wall back together one piece at a time, trying to figure out, okay, where does this piece go? Assuming that the pieces don't fall too far from where they originated. And archaeologists still have these issues today when they try to restore an ancient building that they find the remains of. The walls have almost always collapsed, and of course it's like working a jigsaw puzzle. Well, where does this one go? Where does that one go? How does this one fit? And so they're doing that. It's very painstaking work. And then in verse 3, Tobiah the Ammonite, who was at his side, said, what are they building? Why, if a fox climbed up on it, he'd break down their wall with stones. Pitiful effort. Puny walls. Boy, I'll tell you, if a fox jumped up, that whole thing would fall. Stand back, boys. We don't want to get hit when it falls. Okay? So little defamation campaign going on here. Here, now, I want you to look at verse 4. Nehemiah jumps in with a spontaneous prayer. Hear us, O our God, for we are despised. Turn their insults back on their own heads. Give them over as plunder in a land of captivity. Do not cover up their guilt or blot out their sins from your sight, for they have thrown insults in the face of the builders. Somebody says you ought not pray bad things on people. Well, he sure does here. He says, Lord, lay into them. Just give them a good chunk of it, buddy. You put the whooping on them. Because they're hindering us doing our work the way we should. And then he says in verse 6, so we built the wall until all of it reached half its height, for the people worked with all their heart. Now, here's one of the great dangers. One of the greatest danger times in rebuilding anything, whether it's your life or a project or anything else, is when you get to about the halfway point. Because finishing is the hard part of it. You know? The hardest thing when I did research papers was actually writing it. I love doing the research. I love the reading and the note-taking and outlining, and I'd have it all written except for the writing. I'd have it outlined in my mind. I'd have little notes written here and there. I had all these quotes lined up, and I knew if I ever got this thing down in black and white, it was going to be an absolute masterpiece. And I'll be honest, I write great papers if you can get them out of me. But the hardest thing for me to do was to sit down and actually compose it. Now, once I did, it just flowed like water. Very seldom did revisions. One shot, signed the line, handed in. A+. But that last half, that part where you have to persist to the finish line. They say in running these marathons, you reach a certain point in the marathon race, they're like, what, 23 or 26 miles? They say and different people have a different place, but every runner, even the best ones, they reach a point in the race where you do what is called hitting the wall. You are at a point where you think you're done, you can't do any more, there's no way you're going to finish. And the great runners are the ones that will run through that. They'll just fix their eyes on a line ahead of them and just put one foot in front of another, just kind of, go through the motions. And after a little bit, once you get through that, then all of a sudden you get what's called the second wind, and then you run on. And it's all over with. I think a lot of things in life are that way. I think marriages are sometimes that way. I think child raising is sometimes that way. I think church building is sometimes that way. Achieving a degree, building a business. It seems like almost everything in life has that, that initial success followed by that plateau period when you got to just kind of make yourself go ahead and keep doing it, knowing that this too shall pass, and then eventually Tobias and Sanballat and Geshem and all the opposition falls away, and then things go on. And that's the hardest time. The first thing you have to do is recognize discouragement when you're going through it. Because like so many things in life, we don't recognize it when we have it. People who are depressed don't think of themselves as depressed. Alcoholics don't see themselves as alcoholics. Habitual liars don't recognize the fact that they are habitual liars. I'm sorry, but it's true. The biggest challenge with any problem in our life is coming to terms with and admitting that, yes, I do have a problem with this and I need some help. And discouragement's the same way. We disguise it as a lot of things. If you look at verse 10, we're going to see basically 4 steps in recognizing discouragement. Number 1 is what we call fatigue. You're just tired of it. You're done with it. You're tired of it. Look what it says. Meanwhile, the people in Judah said, now, they posted guards to meet the opposition. The opposition continues to grow. Things are getting tough now. The wall is half finished. Hey, it's better than it's been in 100 years, right? Wouldn't it be easy to just say, hey, half a wall's better than none. Let's just leave it the way it is. I know I don't have the driveway done, but the front half of it looks great. Rest of it can wait. It'll be here tomorrow. World's not going to end. People on Google looking at the picture of the house, they can't tell. So, first of all, look what it says. The people of Judah said, the strength of the laborers is giving out. One of the things kids will do when you raise them is they'll test you to the limits of your strength. They'll see if they can wear you down. Amen? Yeah, they'll wear you down. And a lot of adults will do the same thing, by the way. They'll wear you down. That's what these opposition people are doing to the people of Judah. They're wearing them down. The laborers are giving out. I don't think giving out here means that they're physically exhausted so much as it means they're just discouraged. I mean, they've done a lot, but when they stand back and look at it and realize it's only half done, it doesn't look like that much to them. Sometimes we're our own worst critics. The second thing you experience when you're going through discouragement is frustration. Is this ever going to end? Is there any way to turn this real quick? I'm so tired. You become short-tempered and ill with everybody, and you just, you don't know why. Look at the next statement. Strength of the laborers is giving out, and there is so much rubble that we can't rebuild the wall. There's just so much. Well, we could say, if you use rubble for the word life, you could say the same thing in our personal lives, couldn't you? There's so much rubble. That's what happens in life. So much rubble. There's so much, just debris everywhere. Have you ever noticed how much debris there is in our lives? How much unnecessary stuff that's out there? A lot of which we didn't even ask for. I'm on the way home, I get a call. I hate to bother you with this, but bingo. Worked a full day. Well, I know, but this is real, and I'll be honest with you. I got a text at about 2:30 this afternoon. I get out at 3. Got a text at 2:30. Marty says, Carmen just texted me. Abby's in the hospital. She's not well. Carmen sounds real discouraged. And when my wife says this to me, I take it seriously. She says, I think it would be good if you could stop by and visit with her. Now, I trust her judgment. She is infinitely smarter about ministry than I am. I'll just be honest with you. I'm not real good at it. But she is. But when she says, and I always, sometimes if I'm not sure about doing something like that, I call her back. I said, listen, I'm awful tired, and I've got a lesson tonight, and I don't quite have it done yet. Do you really think I need to go and see her today, or could I maybe wait and go see her tomorrow? And she said immediately, no, my gut feeling is you need to go see her today. I said, okay, I'll be home late. Can you call out back and get Jonathan to fix dinner for us? Which he did. But the thing is, that was unplanned. Now, I don't want to use the word debris in a negative way, but that's debris in my schedule. That was something I hadn't planned for. That was a section of the newly built wall that just collapsed that's now got to be put back. And that's okay. That's what life's about. I'm sure Doc gets debris in his life every day. He has
about Saturday about 12, and the dog's been sick for 3 days.
Yeah, and I'm afraid he's going to die if you don't see him right now. Or the cow's in breach, what can we do? And so at 2 o'clock in the morning, you put on the long pants and the heavy coat and the boots and head out to the field, right? It just happens. Well, we've all got our own versions of that. Jay gets a call from Atlanta. Hey, Jay, I hate to tell you, but Dad's not doing well. Well, I don't know what Jay had planned for the next week, but it ain't planned now. It's off the calendar. Because at this point, you go and you take care of whatever you have to as long as you have to do it. And the rest of it can ride. Of course, you know something, and Marty always tells me this. She says, don't worry about it. It'll be here tomorrow. And that's my worst nightmare. Yeah, it's going to be there tomorrow along with all the other stuff and all this stuff too and all that stuff, plus the things that come up tomorrow that I hadn't planned for today. And at some point, the pile of debris gets higher than the wall. Have you ever had one of those days where you look at the pile and it's so deep you don't even know where to start digging? You know that what's needed is digging, but you don't know where to start.
I sure hope we can finish on a happy note. You're making me really.
Are you getting discouraged?
We didn't know that was how to be discouraged.
Well, I'll tell you what I'm trying to get you to do is I'm teaching you how to recognize the signs of what's going on when it's going on. Number 3, there is a certain amount of failure involved, and we've seen that in all of these examples we gave in the Bible. Notice, they say there's so much rubble that we cannot rebuild the wall. That's the giving up cycle. That's where you say, that's it, towels in, I give up. Not even going to try anymore. I'm wasting my time. And finally, in verses 11 and 12, there's an added element that I think kind of drives all of this. It says, and notice what it says in verse 11, also our enemies said, before they know it or see us, we're going to be right there among them and we'll kill them and put an end to their work. And then the Jews who lived near came and told us 10 times over, wherever you turn, they will attack us. Fear. You get fatigued, you get frustrated, you get a sense of failure, and then fear sets in. You say, I can't do it, and here's the fear, it's never going to change. And so now you're paralyzed. Emotionally, spiritually, parentally, financially, whatever. Well, okay, for the sake of Dale.
Let me say something.
No, now don't. I'm trying to get you out of the hole, dude.
I've got myself out. God gave us this ability to forget a bunch of that stuff that happened in our past.
Sure.
And He gave us that ability. If it's all the time about all the things that I did when I was 20 and 21, 22, and so on, like everybody else. Well,
Now, I lived a perfect life at that period of my life.
well,
You go ahead and tell us what you did. Huh?
Now, lying is one of the problems.
Did I leave that off of my list? That's a different sin that we need to talk about next week, right? No, you're right. We do have, a lot of times people who tend to dwell in discouragement tend to hang on to a lot of baggage that is not needed.
Right.
We not only get hit with, we get enough debris anyway without leaning on the wall and knocking it over.
Yeah, here's another point. A lot of people think about what other people think about
Yes.
things that you've done, and you worry about what other people think that you've done,
Yeah.
and they don't care. Well, they got their
Or
own
if they
problem.
do care, who cares?
That's right.
Yeah.
Who cares what anybody thinks?
Somebody says, oh, I remember something you did when you were 16. Dude, that's 50. That's a half a century ago.
Well, people, they dwell on that sometimes.
Yeah, they do. They do. Now, if it's something traumatic that happened to them, I can understand where that might stay with them. But, I know what you're talking about. And part of that is we don't really accept the grace and forgiveness of God.
Amen.
Somebody comes up and says, oh, I remember what you did when you were 18. Who cares? God's already, that's gone. God could care less about that. Yeah, it was terrible and I shouldn't have done it. And gee golly, I'm sorry. And sure hope I don't ever do something stupid like that again. But hey, that's 50 years ago. And I'm not interested in talking about 50 years ago. Now, if you want to talk to me about something I did last week that I might still need to take care of, then let's bring it up and talk about it, I appreciate that point. That's very good. Sometimes part of the debris that we have to process is self-imposed. And if we keep doing that to ourselves, it might not be bad to get with a counselor and find out why we feel the need to do that. Some people, for some reason, just feel the need to beat themselves up. And they'll search until they find something. And that's kind of unfortunate. Because you kind of lock yourself into a cycle of failure. Let me give you a real quick list. How are we doing here? Yeah, we can wrap this up real quick. Let me give you a quick list of things that come out of this passage that you can do to help dig yourself out of discouragement. Now, these are spiritual things, okay? There may be physical things and emotional things. If your financial situation is part of your discouragement, obviously you need to get with a wise Christian person who can give you good financial counsel and maybe set up a plan to dig yourself out. Okay, got that. But there are some basic spiritual things that we can apply in our lives regardless of the situation and go from there. First of all, cry out to God. Go to God. Tell Him what you need. Be honest with Him. Look at chapter 4, verses 4 and 5. What did we just notice? He's right in the middle of this. He says the repairs were made, and this was done, and that was done, and we built it up to about half the height of the wall. Oh, and then Sanballat showed up, and then Tobiah showed up, and all these guys were just throwing dung at us and calling us names and tearing us down and ridiculing us. Hear us, O our God, for we are despised. Turn their insults back on. See what he did? What's the first thing he did? Did he picket the walls? Make signs of protest? Did he file a protest with the Circuit Court of Appeals? He cried out to God, didn't he? First thing he did. Let me suggest that you do something radical in the hard times of your life. Instead of waiting and calling on God last, try calling on God first. Engage him on the front end of that situation. You know, hi, my name's Doug and I'm an alcoholic. Dear God in heaven, help me to overcome this sin in my life. Now, where can I find a 12-step meeting? Or maybe the first thing is, dear Lord in heaven, help me to find an effective 12-step meeting where I can find fellowship with others who are going to help me get myself out of this mess. Huh? But who are you putting in on the front side? Yeah. I think it's always good before you hire a coach to hire a general manager. Amen? You need to have a good general manager, good CEO to run the company, and once you get that, then you can hire a coach. If I need a life coach from church or somewhere else, if I need a life coach to help me pull my life together, before I hire my life coach, I better make sure I got my general manager in place. Because what's that general manager going to do? He's going to be the main voice in deciding who that coach is. And I need to make sure that whoever that coach is, for whatever I need help with, that coach is compatible with the philosophy of my general manager. Now, I'm using a lot of metaphor here, but you know what I'm saying. I see people all the time in hard times of life, very discouraged, very down and out, and they go out and hire a life coach without getting right with God first. And they hire somebody whose philosophy of life is absolutely, totally incompatible with where they should be going to really get their life where it should be. Okay? So that's what we're thinking about. Cry out to God. Look at verse 9. But we, he says, Sanballat, Tobiah, the Arabs, the Ammonites, the men of Ashdod heard the repairs on the walls had gone ahead, and there were gaps being closed, and they got angry, and they plotted together to come and fight against us and stir up trouble. But we prayed to our God and posted a guard day and night. Now, they didn't just pray to God and say, God, deliver us. They posted guards. They're not stupid. But the first thing they did was pray to God. Oh, and then we also stuck a sword in the back of our belt just in case we needed to fight them off when they showed up. But who did they engage first? God. He was part of their defensive plan. So, number one, cry out to God. Number two, continue to do the work God gave you. You're not going to solve anything in life, regardless of what it is, by no longer being a Christian. By no longer being faithful. I've heard people say, well, I just don't feel like I'm where I should be in my life right now, so I don't take communion. Really? That's like saying, well, I'm sick right now, so I don't think I'll eat. Well, what are you going to do? You're going to get weaker. Well, yeah, but I think the best way to overcome weakness is to starve yourself. Oh, okay. Yeah. So don't come to church, don't pray, don't encourage, don't get the encouragement of others, don't take the Lord's Supper, don't study on the Word, don't cement your relationship with God. Just sit out there in the desert, pour dirt on your head, and watch yourself shrivel up and die, and then blame God because it happens. And that's what happens all the time. Continue to do what God called you to do. Look at verse 6. So we built the wall. This is right after saying, Sanballat criticized us. Tobiah criticized us. They all tried to condemn our work. So, how did we respond? We kept building. Why? Because that's what God sent them to do. Didn't change the mission. No matter what happens in your life personally, it doesn't change your mission. It doesn't change God's will for you. It may alter your ability to respond in certain ways, but it doesn't change God's will for you. God still wants you to be conformed to the image of His Son, be faithful to Him. He still wants you to persevere. Number 3, concentrate on the big picture. Okay? Verse 13, I stationed some of the people behind the lowest points of the wall, the exposed places. After I looked this over, I stood up and said to the nobles and the officials and the rest of the people, don't be afraid of them. Remember, big picture. Big picture. Remember, the Lord who is great and awesome, and fight for your brothers, your sons, your daughters, your wives, and your homes. He says we're fighting for our existence and we've got God on our side. That's the big picture. Don't lose sight of that. Okay? Number 4, claim the encouragement of God's promises. Again, he says, go to the low spots, defend where we're weak, but always remember as you fight for your families that God is great and God is awesome and God is with us. That's part of God's promises. Psalm 46, you don't have to go there, but I'll share it with you real quick. Psalm 46 verses 1 to 3 is a very eloquent statement of that we need. This is a good one to mark and keep in a very visible place. God is our refuge and strength, an ever-present help in trouble. Hear the word ever? Ever-present help in trouble. Therefore I will not fear, though the earth give way and the mountains fall into the heart of the sea. Though its waters roar and foam and the mountains quake with their surging. No matter how bad it gets, if my whole world is swept away under my feet, still have God. And I've got to hang on to that. Finally, just a bit of suggestion. In the midst of carrying your awful burden, go grab a piece of somebody else's and try carrying it a little bit. There is nothing in the world more wholesome than service. Number 1, and most important, it gets you... by the way, let me say this before I make this point. Did you notice that the key to this rebuilding of the wall is all the people worked together? They supported each other. Every man on that wall carried his sword because there's no one man on that wall who could defend the wall. If an attack came, it would take a whole group of men in one section of the wall, all bringing out their sword, to hold that breach until others came to support them. It's the way it works. That's why God calls us to be church, is because He wants us all to have our swords at hand and ready. Hey, we don't know where the wall's going to breach. Maybe it'll breach at Dale's area. Maybe it'll breach in Fred's area. Maybe it'll breach in Mark's area back there. I don't know. You don't know. You get a phone call one day, and I was thinking about this yesterday. I got a phone call and somebody said, we need to talk. And I thought to myself, in light of this, well, we got a breach over here. Okay? And I'll try to fill that breach, but if I can't, I may have to call in a couple of you to help me fill it. It's what we do. It's how we survive. Don't be afraid to get involved with helping somebody else with something. You know? The power of the 12-step program, the power of the meetings is in the group dynamic. It's not in, a lot of those meetings take place, they don't even have a leader. You don't, in fact, you rotate the leadership in most of them. You know? Well, Paul, you're going to be the leader in the meeting next week. Week after that, Danny wants you to lead the meeting. Yeah, and they do that on purpose. Because they don't want you to build your recovery around a person who is the problem solver. Because guess what? Paul's an addict, Danny's an addict, Dale's an addict, we're all junkies. We're all messed up. We're helping each other. There's a mutual support, and that's so important. So there's your suggestions. Just some ideas out of this passage that I think at least gives us a start on dealing with discouragement. Now, are you going to need some counseling? Maybe. Do you maybe need some mentoring from a faithful Christian? Not a bad idea. We don't do near enough of that in the church. We don't do near enough mentoring with one another where, you're going through what I've already been through. Let me stand by your side and help walk you through this. My job's not to make your decisions. My job's to give you godly advice and guidance.
Sometimes, too, if you're so discouraged, all you got to do is look around and find somebody in a deeper hole than you are.
Yeah. But that doesn't make my hole feel any better, George.
But it does sometimes.
That's true. Or you look in the bottom of your hole and there's some guy down there in the bottom under you. You find out you're about a third of the way up. Yeah. We can always find worse situations, but when you're going through a hard time, you don't see that. You don't see that. But again, what do we do when we get in hard times? We tend to turn inside and focus on ourselves. We look in the mirror and stare at ourselves. Poor me, poor me, poor me, poor me. My life's so bad. I have so many problems. I'm worried. My life, and my kids do this. This is worse than anybody's ever been. No, it isn't. I've got a little girl right now going through her parents' divorce. She is torn all to pieces, and I get it. So yesterday I gave her my stuffed kangaroo. I said, I want you to carry this around with you all day, and when you get sad, I want you to just hug it with all your might. Now, where does it go at the end of the day? Back to your desk. She took that thing, and she about wore that thing out that day. When they brought her to me, she was bawling. She was a basket case. She wasn't going to do anything that day. She had a great day and has not borrowed it again and has had 2 great smiley face days, back to back. She needed a little comfort. And she got it from a stuffed kangaroo. But what she really got it from was I picked her up and held her on my lap and I said, honey, I love you. And I know this is hard. And parents sometimes are so dumb. They really are. But you just have to forgive them and love them. And you know something? You're going to be fine.
I want one of those kangaroos.
I can give you one. I can take care of you. Listen. You wouldn't believe how many broken hearts I saw. People walk in my room and they wonder why I've got all these stuffed animals. I got stuffed animals all over my room. It looks like a little girl's room. I got snakes and bugs and turtles and caterpillars and bears and cats and dogs and all kinds of stuff all over my room, including a great big dog about that tall, Hank. And that's my therapy. My kids... If I have a kid that's hurting, word's gotten around and they take this with them. They understand. You can carry it for a day. You aren't allowed to play with it. You aren't allowed to goof around with it. You aren't allowed to bother people with it. And at the end of the day, you have to bring it back to Mr. Downs. I've never had it happen yet where it wasn't sitting on my desk by about 2:30. And I very rarely have to hand it out more than once. But it's the fact that somebody cares. It's that human touch. They can't have the animal until they sit in my lap and we talk about it. Then it's okay. We need to do that with each other. You don't have to sit in somebody's lap, but it sure helps to have somebody's arm around you sometimes.
Amen.
We can help each other. And if you sense somebody that's discouraged, go to them. Oh, you take the initiative because they won't. You take the initiative.